Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. I've got the honor of welcoming somebody who's a genuine war journalist, somebody who's on the button with issues around West Asia, particularly the Islamic Republic of Iran's current conflict with the US and Israel, or should I say their belligerent aggression upon Iran, which is probably more accurate. We've got Dimitri Lascaris, who's with us, a lawyer, a journalist, somebody who's very much on level with trying to get to the truth. That's what independent media is about. That's what Deep Dive Perspective is about. And Dimitri will tell you his site as well, because I'd like you to go, if you don't know about him, I'd like you to go to his YouTube site. It's very, very informative. Huge amounts of information there, and someone you should follow for sure. And do like, share, and thank channels like ours, DDP and Dimitri, because we rely on you to basically empower us to continue giving the voice to the voiceless and to tackle legacy media and its kind of propaganda. Most legacy media now is state-run propaganda or corporate-run propaganda, and you're only going to find truth with people like ourselves. That's my plug. That's to get us going. But now down to the real business. Welcome to the show, Dimitri.
It's a pleasure to be here, Syed. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And let's start with your intrepid visit to the Islamic Republic of Iran while the war was going on. You know, not many journalists are going to be that keen on that, but that was very brave. And I was following you, and you know, wherever you seem to turn up, the Americans or the Israelis were soon bombing that area. I hope they weren't trying to target you, because they have this habit in Lebanon and in Gaza of targeting journalists. They've killed more journalists in these aggressions than probably the First and Second World War combined. How was your trip to Iran, and what did you make of that country? What do you make of this war?
Well, I began the trip on March 20th, so this would have been the beginning of the fourth week, I believe, of this war of aggression, and it lasted for 11 days. We visited 7 cities after crossing into the country by land from Turkey, and those cities were Tabriz in the north near Azerbaijan, then Tehran, then Esfahan, one of the most beautiful cities I've ever seen. Then we went to Shiraz. Finally, we made our first stop on the Persian Gulf at Bushehr, where the Russians have been building a nuclear reactor. And then we went to Bandar Abbas on the Strait of Hormuz. And from there, we spent an afternoon in Minab, this town south of Bandar Abbas, where several Tomahawk missiles killed 168 students and teachers on the very first day of this war of aggression. And then when we completed that trip, which included, by the way, a brief foray into the Strait of Hormuz on a civilian vessel, we took a train all the way back to Tehran, 22 hours straight, had a 1-hour pit stop in the train station in Tehran, and then grabbed a 12-hour bus ride to the Turkish border. So that was it. It was extremely intense, very tiring, but just an extraordinary experience in so many different ways. You know, it's hard to know where to begin. I guess I could summarize it by saying that this is a country that is very poorly understood in the West by the vast majority of people, primarily because of the lies, the misinformation, and the omissions constantly spewed or perpetrated by the corporate media and by the political elites. This is a country that is far more sophisticated, far more resilient, far more resourceful, far more technologically advanced, and far more united than I think we can even begin to appreciate in the West if you're basing your judgments upon what the corporate media and the political elites are telling you. And the last thing I'll say, just sort of as an overview, is that for me personally, it was a very moving trip because there were, on the one hand, the affection that was shown to us, the hospitality by people who were being subjected to a criminal war of aggression, and really a campaign of terror on a daily basis, was extraordinary. And the people there are strongly desirous of peace. This is not a warmongering people. This is not a violent people by nature. And I personally feel, having experienced Iran twice now, I went last year in May, just before the 12-day war, that these people are, in general, considerably more civilized, and I choose my words carefully here, than we are in the West.
Well, you're in Athens, and it reminds me of the civilizational exchanges and clashes as well between the Persian and the Greek empires once upon a time. So these people, these civilizations, go back far into the distant past, more so than perhaps Donald Trump can even recall in any way, shape, or form, from the way he talks about that region and the people. His understanding and the understanding of the Americans seems to be very shallow. Why are they conducting a war on a nation which is, I've followed them for decades, and a nation which has essentially wanted to try and create peace and create relations with the West? They are, by nature, West-orientated, a lot of people in Iran. And of course, the revolution was a watershed because there was a reaction to the American CIA operation to overthrow Mossadegh back in the 50s, and they imposed this Shah. And from there, of course, the people have been oppressed. They were oppressed, tortured, murdered, killed, and it led to a revolution, which now, of course, has this reaction to America. And America doesn't seem to have stopped its kind of assault on Iran ever since '79, to be fair. But what particularly motivated the US here? Some say it's Israel who dragged him into the war. Others say it's a necessity for the US Anglo-Zionist empire as an existential thing that they have to do to tackle China, to tackle their hegemony, to make sure that they maintain the resources and the roots. Which side of the line do you fall, or do you think it's a bit of all of that?
Well, sure, Israel's government exercises a disproportionate influence over the U.S. government, but I reject out of hand this Mearsheimer narrative, and I respect John Mearsheimer and Steve Walt, who put forward a detailed analysis of U.S.-Israeli relations and concluded that, in effect, the Israel lobby has a stranglehold over foreign policy, the foreign policy of the United States, at least insofar as it impacts the region of West Asia. I'm not buying it. The United States government has long coveted control of this region. We can go back many, many decades, but I'll start with the end of the Second World War, where U.S. military planners described this region, and particularly its resources, as a stupendous, that's the word they used, a stupendous source of strategic power. And they also called it the greatest material prize in human history. So that'll tell you all you need to know about how the military and political elites have long viewed this region. It's not just the huge, copious, easily accessible quantities of oil and gas upon which the global economy is critically dependent, but there's many other commodities coming out of this region, including large amounts of fertilizer, which is absolutely essential to, feeding the human population, aluminum, numerous other critical of helium. And furthermore, it lies at the nexus of Africa, Asia, and Europe. And there are two very important maritime transportation choke points in this region. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden, and of course, the Strait of Hormuz, which connects the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and then onwards to, destinations in Asia and Africa. So when you add it all up, control of this region, domination of this region, would be extraordinarily empowering for any country. And the United States has long sought to do precisely this and has never actually achieved that goal. Not in the post-World War II period, seriously. I don't think ever in history has the United States had complete control over West Asia. Yeah. But after taking out Iraq, after taking out Syria, the governments, whatever you may have thought of them, that refused to be subservient to Washington, there's one opponent standing of any significant, military power, and that is Iran. And Wesley Clark, a former Supreme Commander of NATO, told us back, I think it was in 2007, that he had discovered that there were plans in the Pentagon for taking out 7 or 8 predominantly Arab and Muslim countries. We all know who they are. And the crown jewel was Iran. So this is a long-standing aspiration, and I think that it's not just about China. China has a lot to do with it, but it's just about global domination in general. You control this region, you may not necessarily be dominant throughout the world, but you will certainly be in a commanding position. And Americans understand that, the political elite. So that's what this is all about. It's about destroying any and all resistance to American and Israeli hegemony in this critically important region.
Well, I can certainly confirm from the little research that I've done, a third of the world's helium passes through that Hormuz Strait. They say, as you said, aluminium at least 10%. There's plastics and food as well, because the Gulf Arab monarchies need food, and 80% of it comes through this region. There's also, of course, the other issues around fertilizer, nitrogen supplies, based on all of that kind of the products, the sulfur, etc. And all of this adds up to big trouble, because some of the economists, and there are several of them who've been saying this, Professor Keane and others, they're saying that, look, what America has done here is essentially put the world at risk in terms of famine, that within 3 to 5 months we could have famine. That September is the deadline for the time when most of these products, which were passing through the Hormuz, will run out. Essentially, whatever's got out is out in the marketplace now, but what's happening now is the closure, essentially, of that whole region means that the rest of the world is on note. What do you think of that possibility of an entire, famine and a kind of an inflationary period here in the West? Is anybody going to be spared if America continues this blockade that seems to be in place right now, and if Iran continues to be bullied into sort of trying to hand over its sovereignty and its control over the Hormuz, obviously, as well?
No one will be spared. Some people, of course, will be impacted far more detrimentally than others, especially in the global south, areas of the global south that are critically dependent upon the resources of this region and exports through the Strait of Hormuz. They will be impacted most detrimentally, but nobody should have any illusions about where this is heading. We are heading towards a global economic depression. And the United States will perhaps be the last major economy to be hit, but it's going to be hit hard. And this is going to provoke a tremendous amount of social instability. You may see revolutionary forces emerge. The whole system of capitalism upon which the global economic elite depends for its enrichment and its empowerment may actually be at risk here, depending upon how severe the situation becomes. There's a reason why successive administrations were urged again and again by neocons in the United States and by Israel to attack Iran, and they didn't. Bush was urged to, the younger Bush, Obama, Biden, because they knew that the risks were enormous. And, Trump decided to take the plunge, I think in part because he was emboldened by his outright kidnapping of President Maduro in Venezuela, and also because the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad had fallen, and there was a perception that the axis of resistance was at its weakest point. And by the way, there are indications from this character, Amos Hochstein, who was the senior advisor in the Biden administration, that if Biden had won a second term, he may well have done the same thing as Donald Trump. So this is bipartisan. I don't think it's because Trump, it may well be that the Israeli government has compromised on Donald Trump, but I'm skeptical that they actually need to use it when it comes to getting Trump to attack Iran. He's been talking about doing that for decades. In any case, the stakes are enormous, and I think that this is going to unfold into one of the most colossal geopolitical blunders in all of human history if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed for several months more.
Well, they don't seem to be learning their lesson. Clearly, the first two wars have shown that Iran is not going to roll over, and whether it was regime change they wanted, whether they wanted insurrection from the people, whether it was complete decapitation of that leadership, or whether it was the destruction of all Iran's missiles. Virtually every metric by which Trump seemed to make this war a necessity, even the control of the nuclear material, he's failed. It seems that every option, and now they're in this kind of zone of desperation, but are putting on this veneer of having won this war. But in reality, it's Iran who's saying, we don't want to negotiate with you because we know that you're not doing it in good faith. And what we want is those 10 points. So those 10 points are really important. And when I look at them, it's almost impossible for me to imagine that Donald Trump and the Americans would agree to the ideas of Iran's nuclear, sovereignty being maintained and all this kind of keeping their ballistic missiles, not reducing their support of the oppressed in the region and what the Americans will call proxies, but what Iran will call allies, Hezbollah, Yemen's Ansarullah. So there's so many levels on which there just seems to be no real chance of a compromise on this. Do you think that war's on the horizon and they're going to press ahead, or do you think there's any chance of some sort of agreement being reached with Pakistan, running around trying to pin Iran down, I would say, to do what the Americans are telling them? That's how I read it. But do you think war is on the horizon?
Sadly, I'm absolutely convinced of it. I see no overlap whatsoever between the two positions of the belligerents. Trump lied through his teeth when he said that he accepted the 10-point peace plan of Iran as a basis for negotiation. J.D. Vance showed up in Pakistan and basically issued a maximalist set of demands, which amounted to a surrender by Iran and had nothing to do with a 10-point peace plan. And then when Iran predictably rejected it, on the first day of negotiations, he left Islamabad. And he said on his way out the door, this is our final and best offer. I mean, how could anybody in these circumstances harbor any illusions that there's going to be a negotiated settlement anytime soon? And one thing I really want to highlight for your audience is that when I went to Iran in May of last year before the 12-day war, and I spent dozens of hours walking the streets of the capital, unaccompanied by anybody, just freely roaming the streets, riding the subway. I didn't see a single pro-government protest, nor did I see an anti-government protest. People were just going about their daily lives, as you would see people do in any Western city. And then on this trip, I saw pro-government protests in every single city, without exception. And I saw multiple protests in some cities. There was one night in Shiraz where I think we saw, and we weren't looking for them. We were just driving from getting an ice cream cone to our hotel. We saw 4 separate pro-government protests at 4 different major intersections. I didn't see that in my first trip. So what we've actually done is we have united the people of Iran to an extraordinary degree. Right. And one moment that really stands out for me in one of these protests in Shiraz, I got out of our car and I started walking through the crowd, and there was a woman holding up a sign, which she had written in some broken English, no negotiations between the angels of Minab and the demons of Epstein. And this is a sentiment that is strongly held amongst many Iranians. They don't even want negotiations. They are fed up. The killing of the supreme leader, the murder of those school children in Minab, the destruction of hospitals, the attacks on universities, on sites that have been designated as World Heritage Sites by UNESCO. These people are not in a sort of fanatical way, but they are indignant to the very core of their being, and they're not going to capitulate. They're just not going to capitulate, and that's what Donald Trump is demanding. So I think that all of these military assets that have been moved to the region during this so-called ceasefire are preparation for round 2. And I'm very concerned that round 2 could be far more deadly and destructive than the first round. So the United States has 3 aircraft carrier battle groups in the region. That is the first time, I think, in some 20 years that they've had that much naval firepower close to Iran. So I would predict that within the next week or 2, we're going to see a resumption of the hot war.
Well, Qatar and some other nations are really backing out. I mean, this time they've started openly saying that we're not going to have US bases. This is what I gather. And of course, Iran targeted US bases and US assets around this region. And as Trump kept, asserting that he was going to destroy infrastructure, even, the water facilities and the electric facilities. He's been openly threatening these things. And of course, the Islamic Republic of Iran says we're going to do the same thing back. that in a way means, in part, it means the destruction of the infrastructure of West Asia, basically, is being triggered. At the same time, you've got the Americans blockading deliberately all these supplies. That brings across one other narrative, which has been lurking, which I haven't dealt with too much, but I'd like to hear your take on it. The narrative goes along these lines, that essentially the US is almost doing this because it benefits the trillionaires and billionaires, because they want a collapse of the global economy. Their hyper-capitalism was running its course. It was in big trouble. Neoliberalism was in big trouble. You and yourself in Greece can testify, I think, as being the first, if you like, victims and perhaps the experiment that they were doing in terms of globalism and in terms of controlling the smaller nations. And, you know, I can't help but try to join the dots and link that up with this conflict as being yet another way of maybe deliberately spiraling the world into a sort of an economic collapse, so that they usually afterwards, it's the same millionaires and billionaires who have their gold bullion stashed away somewhere, who have their funds stashed away, and can come back into these regions and then say, oh, we're here now to reconstruct and to rebuild and whatnot. War sometimes benefits even these global Epstein elitists. Do you think that might be also Trump doing the bidding of these kinds of nefarious forces in the background again? Do you think it's a possibility?
Well, I don't want to sound like an amateur psychiatrist. I have no psychiatric credentials, but my impression as a layperson is that these oligarchs, these titans of finance and industry, are insane. I mean, you look at the behavior of Elon Musk or Alex Karp or even Bill Gates. I mean, these are abnormal people. These are people who suffer, I don't know what the diagnosis is, but from my perspective, they are mentally ill. The mere fact that you feel, you know, that having several $100 billion of wealth isn't sufficient, having tens of billions of dollars of wealth isn't sufficient, that you need to accumulate wealth without limit, even to the point of becoming perhaps one day a trillionaire. This is a form of insanity to me. So these people are psychologically unstable. They are extremely egotistical to an absurd degree. They're capable of anything, and I think they are fully supportive of this insane war on Iran. So I can't discount what you're proposing or others may have proposed in this regard, that they're trying to crash the global economy. I don't think we should discount anything when we talk about the global economic elite.
Sure.
These are truly depraved people, capable of some utterly insane behavior. But as I said, a few minutes ago, this could result in the destruction of a system upon which their wealth depends, the preservation of their wealth depends, and they could very well end up unleashing revolutionary forces and jeopardize their extraordinary wealth. If they're thinking rationally, if they're actually thinking rationally, they would say, why would we take that risk when we already have so much damn money? Why would we potentially jeopardize the system from which we profit so handsomely when we have so much wealth? That would be the rational approach, it seems to me, even if you're acting simply from the perspective of self-interest, and that's all that matters to you. But are they crazy enough to try to tank the global economy and set off a firestorm of outrage across the world? Yeah. I hope that they're not, that's not their objective here. But ultimately, I think we're going to find out one way or another, because this is exactly where we're heading. We are heading to a global economic collapse.
Well, that brings me back to, I think, where your specialism is. I've zoomed the lens out just to give people a little bit more of a perspective on what's actually going. But in the middle of this is, of course, is Iran, is the people of Iran, is those children. And of course, your insights into what was going on there were very fascinating. And I drew you away from that narrative. But I want to bring you back to that, because this is the human story, it's the human angle. That whilst all these machinations go on and all these crazy psychopathic billionaires play their games of thrones, if you like, and money and shares and gold, what in reality on the ground is happening is that people are being displaced, mental health issues are going through the roof, infanticide is being committed, ecocide is being committed. These are all things that are going to affect everybody around the world. And of course, previously, the West was immune to a lot of this kind of damage and this harm that was going on in the global South. It's nothing new to the global South. They've been suffering this for at least the last 50 to 60 years, if not longer. So it's now our turn, perhaps, to feel part of that. I just want to, first of all, give people here in the West more of an idea of what that's suffering. For instance, we call it sanctions, and Iran has had sanctions for over 40 years now. But sanctions, to me, seems like terrorism in another guise. And Iran and the Iranian people, who now are still trying to be nice to the West, still want to be nice to Western people, actually have been the victims of this. It's not just the Gaza genocide. They've been doing this kind of economic sanctions, which has had a real effect on Iran. What sort of effect do you think these so-called sanctions have on people? The siege is not new. The blockade is one thing. It started now, but I would argue that siege has been going on for years.
Well, I have no doubt whatsoever that the sanctions have caused probably at this stage trillions of dollars of damage cumulatively to the Iranian economy, and they've been in effect for decades, and they've been of the most severe form. But at the same time, one thing that very much impressed me about Iran is that you see no obvious lack of essentials within the economy. So there's plenty of food on the shelves, abundant amounts of water, although Iran is a water-stressed country. There was never a problem with water. We never had a problem, there was never any extended blackout of electricity. The train wasn't luxurious, but it was, I think, just as good as the trains in the Amtrak system in the United States, which I've been on before. The metro system was, I thought, far better than most metro systems in major Western cities. And one thing that really struck me is that in all my travels across the country, I never saw a single homeless person. This was mind-blowing. Not a single homeless person. I see homeless persons all over the place when I travel in Western cities, as I'm sure all of you do. Yeah. Those of us who live in major Western cities.
Sure.
And in Canada, where I spend most of my time, it's getting worse. It's visibly worse, much more severe problem now than it was when I was a young man. So this somehow, some way, this extraordinarily resourceful, erudite people has managed quite well with the sanctions, but I imagine, and I can only speculate, that if the sanctions were not in place, this would be a far more prosperous country. And it would probably be, I have no hesitation in saying that if the sanctions weren't in place, this would be the wealthiest country in West Asia and one of the wealthiest in the world, because of the diversity of its resources, the education of its population, its technological sophistication. And so it has been held back from, I think, what one could reasonably describe as its rightful place in the world by these sanctions. But at the same time, they've managed remarkably well to deal with them. Now, the war is another matter altogether. I mean, as I said, they've destroyed hospitals, civilian emergency centers. They've attacked universities. They've killed medical workers. They've attacked many schools. I saw a 12-year-old boy who was playing soccer on a sports complex adjacent to an elementary school. He's dreamt of being a footballer. His leg was shattered. He'd been through multiple surgeries. His parents hadn't told him yet that his coach had been killed in that strike, nor that had they told him that his best friend on this football club had been killed. The Americans used a weapon that had never been tested in combat in striking that school and that sports complex. It was a ballistic missile that is designed to explode above ground. It's packed full of tungsten pellets, and those pellets shoot out at blazing speed. This weapon's obviously designed to maximize the carnage. This is the kind of thing that the Americans and the Israelis are doing around the country. But I saw absolutely no indication that the people there are losing hope or are inclined to make any major concessions to the United States or Israel.
I think this testimony about what life is like there in Iran, I've been several times, and I'm going to echo a lot of what you said. In my time, my travels over 6 months in there, I got the same vibe. This was pre-war. In terms of the actual complaints or the accusations and allegations you get from mainstream Western media and even the political machines and even human rights organizations, they were pretty much at one around mantras about, for instance, women's rights and claiming that women were totally oppressed and suppressed there in some sort of very dark way. They also talked about how the regime, they never refer to Iran as a government or a republic. They don't allude to the fact that it has some sort of a religious democracy of sorts. Those two issues, I'd like your opinion on those. Like, how oppressed did women look when you were there? I mean, in your two journeys there, and what is this political system? Is it something the West has to be totally fearful of?
Well, I can only attest to what I saw, and as I indicated, the first time I went to Iran was in May of last year. So I can't tell you what the situation was like for women a decade ago or 20 years ago. I understand from people, friends of mine who are secular women, who are Iranian. One lives in Iran, others live outside of Iran, that the situation has evolved. And that as a result of popular protest demands for women's rights, the laws relating to, for example, the hijab, the wearing of the hijab, have been relaxed considerably. So again, I'm telling you what the situation was 10 years ago. What I saw in every major city that I went to in Iran was hundreds of women walking the streets without a hijab. And nobody was bothering them.
Right.
No civilians were bothering them, police, morality, or otherwise. I saw, for example, a young woman on the back of a motorcycle on the highway in Iran with no hijab, and she had her arms wrapped around a young man. She was wearing jeans. This is like a scene you would see in any major Western city. I saw that over and over again. And I contrast this, Syed, to what I saw when I was in Qatar about a year and a half ago. I was there for 3 days. I'd never been there before. And in Doha, I saw again and again and again, in the 3 days that I was there, women dressed from head to toe in black. I didn't see any women, at least women who appeared to be Arabic. There were some foreign women who weren't wearing a hijab. They were obviously foreign, but I didn't see anybody who was local, who appeared to be local, who wasn't wearing a hijab. And I repeatedly saw 3-4 women walking in single file behind a man, dressed from head to toe in black. The only thing you could see were their eyes. And they appeared to be adult based upon their height. Okay, I didn't see that once in Iran. I never saw women walking in single file behind a man. Now, perhaps that happens in some more remote villages that are extremely conservative relative to the larger cities. I don't know. I can only tell you what I saw. And also, I've met many women in Iran who occupy positions of authority in academia, in politics, in the media, as lawyers. So I suspect that I can't offer you any kind of a scientific analysis of the rights of women in Iran. I suspect that they have less freedom in Iran than they do in some Western countries. But the narrative that we hear about women in Iran, that they're brutally oppressed. I saw the other day the deputy leader of Canada's Conservative Party, okay, which is almost won Canada's most recent election, stand up in Parliament and say that they drag women off the street in Iran and shoot them if they're not wearing a hijab. This is just outright nonsense, okay? Absolute ridiculous misrepresentations about the status of women in Iran. So I don't purport, I'm not going to claim that it's kind of a human rights paradise for women, but if I were a woman, would I rather live in Iran or Saudi Arabia or Qatar? Based on what I've seen, I would take Iran in a heartbeat.
Yeah. So, and the issue that's often raised is democracy as we know it in the West is looking pretty flawed to me. I mean, I live in Britain and we get people protesting about Palestine action and against genocide, and they're being picked up and thrown into prisons and they're awaiting trials, and people are being locked up for this. And yet we talk about freedom of speech and we talk about democracy and the right to sort of say what we want. It's an illusion in many ways, I think, here already. That much people are beginning to realize. Also, the rich getting richer tells you that something's wrong with the political economy and the way the system is loaded here. That's not all it's cracked up to be. And now inflation and the way the economy is going is beginning to tell us that story more and more. Iran, of course, has been under these sanctions, and it's also got a government which has conservative values. It has traditional old Abrahamic rules and regulations still there, but as you say, it seems to have this flexibility as well. There's this ability to be able to listen to the people. So there is some kind of social contract between the people and the government. There is a communication, there is a parliament, there is a majlis, and whilst there are parameters within that system of governance of Velayat al-Faqih, nonetheless, people have opinions, and they have contrasting opinions in politics, reformists, principalists. There are different discussions about how Iran should be run and what it should do. So is that something you can verify? Because like I've seen it, but I don't know, you've been there more lately. You might be able to tell me a bit more.
I would say that there are certainly elements of democracy in Iran, but for the reasons that you've pointed out. There is a parliament, there is public criticism of prominent political figures. For example, the President Pezeshkian has been on the receiving end of significant criticism during the war for being, from the perception of some Iranians, too much of a dove. And people haven't hesitated in saying this. I do believe that peaceful protest is allowed in Iran.
Yeah.
And this protest movement, which resulted in a relaxation of the laws relating to the wearing of the hijab, for example, it was, I think this was back in 2022. The government responded to it favorably, which is to say, they accommodated the demands of these peaceful protesters. So there are certainly very significant elements of democracy in Iran. Would I describe it as a perfect democracy? No. Is any Western government, exercising perfect democracy? Not by a long shot, okay?
Yeah.
Let's be serious here. And I will even go so far as to say, I don't know which country is less democratic or more democratic.
Sure.
Then I'll pick, the United States. Is the United States more democratic than Iran? The United States, which has been governed for its entire history, certainly the entire post-World War II history, by two parties that agree on almost everything, and once in a while they have a disagreement and make a big brouhaha about it to make it sound as though they're divisive and partisan and there's real democracy and debate in the Congress. But if you actually look at the range of issues that matter to Americans, for example, a public healthcare system, a majority of Americans want universal Medicare. There is widespread opposition to that in both the Democratic and the Republican Party. Nobody talks about the fact that these two parties agree on things like this, which are of profound importance to Americans, and with respect to which a majority of Americans disagree. So is the United States more of a democracy than Iran? I'm not convinced that it is.
Well, my final question, because I know we've got a deadline and I do want to let you go on time with your other commitments after this. Thank you so much for the time you've given us. But I want to just finalize your predictions now, because Iran does still have its military intact, in spite of what Trump says. It does have its navy intact. It does have ballistic missiles. It could even possibly, conceivably, have the ability to make nuclear weapons at some stage in the future as well. The US wants to break Iran. Does it stand any chance of doing this militarily? And if it goes ahead with this war, do you see it as a long war, or do you see this kind of situation concluding with another scenario, i.e. Iran becoming the fourth power in the world and actually beginning to dominate that region even more? What do you see in your crystal ball?
Well, I'm not a military expert, but I guess I think for a layperson, I'm reasonably well informed about military matters because of the work that I've done as a journalist and a lawyer. And I am absolutely convinced that the United States and Israel cannot defeat Iran militarily. I suppose they could if they dropped, several dozen nukes on the country. But if they did that, first of all, they would poison the entire region. Including areas where the American military bases are situated and Israel itself. They would have to use such a large amount of nuclear weapons to destroy this country, which is as big as Western Europe, and whose population and infrastructure is widely dispersed, that they would effectively be contaminating the entire region of West Asia for centuries to come. And quite apart from that, that could lead to extraordinarily dangerous circumstances for all of humanity. vis-a-vis the use of nuclear weapons. So I don't think they're going to go down that path. And if they don't go down that path, they are doomed to lose this war. Their military forces are largely obsolete. They were not constructed to take on an enemy of this nature, which has a vast array of ballistic and cruise missiles and drones, and is extraordinarily adept at using them. And the country itself is, if you look at a topographical map of Iran, it's like a huge natural fortress with massive mountain ranges ringing the country, and all sorts of topographical challenges other than the mountain ranges to overcome if you're going to try to use ground forces. So I think we've already seen very clearly that the Americans cannot defend their military bases in the region. They've been demolished. More and more information is coming out about this. Key radar installations were wiped out very early on in the war by cheap drones. Israel has been pummeled senseless. Its army is on the verge of collapse. It is now getting its derriere handed to it in South Lebanon by the Lebanese resistance using, amongst other things, fiber optic drones very effectively. So this is a war that they are doomed to lose militarily. Economically, Iran has far more cards than the United States has. I don't believe there's any military solution to Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz. All they got to do, Syed, to keep ships from passing through the Strait of Hormuz is occasionally blow up some tanker belonging to a hostile country. Yeah. That'll be more than enough to deter anybody from trying to go through the Strait of Hormuz without Iranian permission. They don't even need to use mines. They don't need to use ship-to-ship missiles. They don't need to use submarines, and they have all of those things. So there's no way that they can wrest control of the Strait of Hormuz from Iran. And just on that basis alone, I don't think this war can be won by the United States and Israel.
Yeah, you're right. The insurance companies won't even cover any of those ships. So if there's no insurance companies, nobody's going to be pushing ships around. And if the ships aren't moving, there's no food and there's no cargo. And if that stretches to the Bab el-Mandeb, hits the Suez Canal, the Hezbollah is also capable of using cruise missiles to knock out the Mediterranean. So you could have a third choke point shut down economically. It's a frightening scenario. It's one that we pray doesn't go any further, and that the Americans see sense and peace is restored, because the other alternative that you've laid out very clearly is just not good for anybody. Now, Dimitri, do let us know your YouTube channel. Where can people find you, please?
Thanks for asking. My YouTube channel is called Reason to Resist. It's Reason, the number 2, and Resist with no spaces. And I also have a Rumble channel called Reason to Resist, although that's kind of a plan B in case YouTube ever has an allergic reaction to our reporting. But so far, we've had good relations with YouTube. Good. And I'm also very active on X. My handle there is @Dimitri Lascaris.
That's amazing. Do check out Dimitri's work. He's prolific in terms of up-to-date reports. We tend to do sort of analysis post-events. Dimitri's far more, finger on the button kind of fella at the moment. So please do go and check out all those. We'll put them up on our lower thirds as well. So do look out for those. And do support independent media. I don't care who it is. You can go to, whether it's The Grey Zone, whether it's Dimitri, whether it's Kevork, El Masyan, whether it's the Cradle. These are the people who are actually giving you the truth. They're actually willing to look at journalism the way it used to be. And I think we need to all probably just withdraw consent from legacy media, because that in itself is a revolutionary exercise, and go to those media individuals who actually want to do a deep dive. You've heard Dimitri today. There's no sugarcoating things. We speak honestly and plainly based on the old school, honest journalism that did once upon a time ago. So I salute you, Dimitri, for all your efforts, and be safe out there if you do go again into those torrid zones. And I wish you all the success, and we'd love to have you back again and again. Whenever you have time, you're welcome on this platform, and we'll see you soon. As for the audience, look, really, my message is very simple. This war is one which is going to hurt everybody. This war is not in the interest, whether you're black, white, or brown. It's not in the interests of anybody from any nationality. This is the truth. Least of all for Americans themselves. If your oligarchs are now desperately trying to find a new system in which they want to squeeze transhumanist, feudal, autocracies upon you, then it's our job to wake up and reject that. Klaus Schwab, I think I've just picked up one notice this week in which he's saying, "Oh, we failed in our efforts to push the agenda that the World Economic Forum had, the globalist agenda." I don't believe him for 1 minute. I wouldn't believe anything these people say. They're full of lies, and they have their talons inside every government, virtually behind every corporate media, and virtually every institution that we own. We need to wake up. In the West, we have the power to do something, which is to vote that, first of all, the people who are their lackeys out of power. Secondly, don't engage with their system. Go back to the smaller businessmen. Go back to the grassroots cottage industries. Go back to creating something which is free of the kind of contamination of these kinds of these bloodsuckers, these economic and other and literal bloodsuckers. We'll talk about that again. Dimitri, thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you again whenever you have time, and good luck. Take care.